120 anti-transgender bills having been introduced across the country this year. We are holding this press conference as bills are sitting on governors' desks and many have already been signed into law. So without further ado, to kick us off, I'd like to introduce HRC President Alfonzo David.
Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Today, we are here to ring the alarm bells and highlight for all of you and the general public that we are in a state of crisis and that we need action now from elected officials, from corporations, and from every member of the public. Despite the fact that the majority of people in this country support non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people, right now, today, hundreds of bills have been introduced in state legislatures around the country that attempt to erase transgender people and attempt to make LGBTQ people second-class citizens. What many people may not realize is that the number of bills we are seeing, particularly bills targeting transgender young people, is unprecedented. This is not a repeat of last year. This is not a repeat of 2 years ago. This is unprecedented. 2021 is on track to become the worst year for state legislative attacks against LGBTQ people in history. The previous record was 6 years ago in 2015, when 15 anti-LGBTQ bills were enacted into law. That record is poised to be shattered as early as this week. 8 anti-LGBTQ bills have already been enacted into law, and another 10 are already on governors' desks awaiting signature. Several more bills, including 2 egregious anti-transgender bills in Tennessee, are poised to pass the second legislative chamber next week. And just to underscore the severity of these bills and the dangerous threshold we are about to cross, if these bills are enacted, it would mean that states will have enacted more anti-LGBTQ bills this year alone than in the last 3 years combined, with still many more bills that may be introduced. Some of these bills contain provisions that really shock the conscience. Some of these bills, including in Alabama and Texas, would make it a felony to provide gender-affirming care to transgender youth, with penalties up to 10 years in prison. Some of these bills require that students who play on sports teams, they can only play based on their reproductive biology or genetics, which would presumably mean that these children would have to be subjected to invasive examinations by doctors before they participate in sports. Imagine children being examined before they participate in sports. Some of these bills mandate that teachers cannot teach anything about LGBTQ people unless it is reviewed by parents. Some of these bills sanction discrimination against LGBTQ people under the guise of religious freedom. And some of these bills even revisit the old bathroom bills in new ways, including a bill in Tennessee that would force establishments who allow transgender people to use restrooms consistent with their gender identity to post offensive red and yellow sign warnings so that users of the bathrooms there can know that transgender people are inside. That's where we are in this country. All of these bills are dangerous and harmful to LGBTQ people, and many of them have particularly singled out some of the most vulnerable in our community, which are transgender youth. Arkansas, Montana, Tennessee, and Texas are particularly egregious. These states are leading the downward spiral of extremist legislation. They're advancing more bills than anywhere else we're seeing, finding what they call innovative ways to really discriminate against LGBTQ people. The bills that we're tracking are nothing more than discrimination dressed up as a solution in search of a problem. Numerous times, lawmakers have been asked to name specific instances or examples that would necessitate these types of bills. And numerous times they've come up with nothing. Because the fact is, these bills are not rooted in the real world. They're rooted in fear, in discrimination, in disinformation, and they're supported by anti-LGBTQ extremist organizations like the ADF. These bills are the latest in a long line of attacks against LGBTQ people, and nothing more than an attempt to score political points by harming and discriminating against people who are already marginalized. Just like other chapters in this, quote, culture war that they're branding, proponents of these bills say that they're pushing them forward in the name of protecting women and children. Nothing could be further from the truth. We've seen this playbook before in the bathroom bills, in efforts to thwart marriage equality, in the decades past initiatives to prohibit LGBTQ people from working in public schools. And another important point that I think is sometimes missed. These bills are also deeply rooted in racism as well as sexism. The images that proponents of these bills most often use are of Black, transgender women and girls. Black girls and women have had their bodies constantly policed in athletics and beyond, and these bills are just another attempt to target them. These bills are hateful, they're hate-fueled, and as doctors across the country have said over and over again, if they are passed, children will die. Already families are having to relocate, pick up and move in order to protect their children and their families' futures. It is important to say here that people are already dying. These bills are further fueling a wave of anti-trans violence that is devastating our community. So far in 2021, this year, we're on track to more than double the number of trans and gender nonconforming people that have been killed in 2020, which was already the deadliest year on record, at least 44 people. This is a national crisis by any objective standard, and it merits national attention and it merits united action. And that is why I published an open letter in the New York Times earlier this week, calling on leaders of corporate America to do more. Many companies have weighed in, supporting voting rights. Many more have supported federal legislation to protect the right to vote and ensure that discrimination laws, or anti-discrimination laws, I should say, protect LGBTQ people, protect women, protect people of color, and people of all faiths. But there is more to do, and there's more we must do now. We're asking business leaders to take action now by adding their names to the chorus of businesses that have already spoken up. We have more than 500,000 companies in this country. More than 20,000 of them employ 500 or more people. But only 81 of those companies have spoken out about state legislation that's harming LGBTQ people. Corporate America must do more. We're also asking the NCAA to continue to take action. We've called on them to oppose anti-trans legislation, and in response to our request, they indicated to the Human Rights Campaign, and they declared that they will only select states for championships that are free of discrimination. We need to see the NCAA follow up this commitment with action. It is not just corporate America. It is not just the NCAA. We also need our entire nation. We need every single person to make their voices heard and make sure that their voices are clear, that these bills are inhumane and unacceptable. In just the last 24 hours, we are starting to see a turning of the tide, but we need more action. The governors of North Dakota and Arizona vetoed a sports ban and an anti-LGBTQ bill, respectively. Those vetoes make sense. These bills are not responding to a real problem, and the American people know that. A recent poll by PBS came out showing that the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of Republicans, oppose this kind of legislation. We now need every single person to make sure their voices are heard. In short, these bills are trying to marginalize LGBTQ people, particularly transgender youths, to score cheap political points. But I want to make sure that I'm clear to all those who are trying to erase us. Our community is not going anywhere. We will never stop fighting for our lives and our futures. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alfonzo. Next, we'll move to Dr. Robert Garofalo. the Division Chief of Adolescent Medicine at Lurie Children's Hospital in Illinois. Dr. Garofalo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. It's both heartbreaking that we have to have this type of press conference and also infuriating, but it's an honor to be here, not only to speak for myself and the work that we do at Lurie Children's, but on behalf of my colleagues across the country, whether they be in Texas or Arkansas, that do this work. You know, none of us are politicians. I'm speaking on behalf of pediatricians, and as pediatricians, we take an oath to do no harm, and we take an oath to and we devote our careers to working with children and families to make sure that they get access to care, and they have the best chance of growing up to live their lives as healthy, productive, and authentic adults. And these pieces of legislation do anything but help trans kids achieve those goals. It's appalling to me the number of bills that are intentionally targeting trans youth and their families, blocking access to care that we know is deemed best practice by almost every mainstream medical organization around there, whether that's the American Academy of Pediatrics or the AMA or the APA. We know that gender affirming care is best practice, and to think otherwise just flies in the face of all available scientific evidence. It's important to start by saying that these bills are predicated in the notion that being transgender is anything but, or being transgender is not a phase, and it's not a trend, and it's not an affectation. A trans identity is a normal and natural part of the human expression, and to view it as anything other than that is, again, just a fallacy and is just not supported by any sort of available scientific evidence. And these bills do nothing more than are designed to discriminate or denigrate or erase the authenticity of trans youth in a way that is the complete opposite of what gender affirming care does. So it's important to think that the majority of studies that have been done, and these treatments are well studied, affirm the fact that these treatments are life-saving. And so denying access to care in many ways is criminal in and of itself. You know, so we know that access to care for trans youth save lives. There have been numerous real-world examples where access to care for these treatments have actually served to save young people's lives. And there's been scores of scientific evidence supporting the notion that these treatments are not only safe, but effective in helping to care for these young people and their families. And we know that these bills are not only anti-trans, but they're sort of anti-science, they're anti-public health, and they're really opposed to sort of the very fabric of the society that I think many of us want to live in. It's just really appalling as a pediatrician that in 2021, we're sitting here today fighting these types of battles, because this is just hate wrapped up in a new, in a new package that is designed to, again, erase the authenticity of the lives of the young people that we care about. And the last thing I would say is that if this is a fight that people want, this is a fight that they're going to get. I mean, whether it's as pediatricians or the parents of these kids, I have seen parents of trans kids fight with fervor for the rights of their children in ways that oftentimes they might not even fight for their own civil rights. And so this is not a battle that we're going to let occur without a fight. And if it's not a fight that any of us wanted as pediatricians or as families, but if it's a fight that is needed, it's a fight that's necessary to win. It's a fight that they're going to get. So again, it's with sadness that I'm here, and it's infuriating that I have to be here as part of this sort of press conference. But as a pediatrician that has devoted my life to caring for these young people and these families, these bills are just an atrocious attempt to really erase the very strengths and authenticity of young people and their families that it is really heartbreaking. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garofalo. Next, we will move to Amy Allen, who's the mother of a 14-year-old transgender son in Tennessee. Amy, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name's Amy Allen. I'm the parent of a 14-year-old transgender son. We moved to Tennessee from Pennsylvania in 2018 because my husband had a great job opportunity here. And then our son came out as trans in 2019. Had he come out before the move, we would have seriously reconsidered moving here to Tennessee. But here we are, and there are so many things we love about living here. We're about half an hour from Nashville, and we've found wonderful friends and neighbors and teachers who have zero issues with our transgender child. But legislators who have never met my amazing, smart, talented kid apparently do have issues. With the anti-LGBT bills moving through the Tennessee legislature this session, we are incredibly frustrated and have talked seriously about leaving Tennessee. It's really exhausting. Every week, I make phone calls to legislators to tell them that these bills are a bad idea. And last week, I sat through a hearing in the Tennessee House Health Committee and listened to legislators grill my son's endocrinologist about gender-affirming care that is sound and ethical and endorsed by dozens of national organizations. And today, we may see Governor Bill Lee sign into law a bill that will stigmatize trans students who just want to use the school bathroom and locker room that aligns with their gender identity. My son starts 9th grade in the fall, and he just wants to be treated like any other high school kid. We're currently working on our son's legal name change, and since he was born in the state of New Jersey, when we update his birth certificate with his legal name, we can also update his gender marker. New Jersey then puts the original birth certificate under seal. So what then? What's to stop my son from trying out for the boys' soccer team? I really don't think that the legislature has thought through these bills, because what will happen then? I can't imagine that they're going to insist on physical examinations of student athletes. I wouldn't stand for that, and I can't imagine that parents of cisgender kids would stand for that either. These bills are just hateful and unnecessary, and from what I have seen, they don't represent the views of the people that we know and love in Tennessee. And I really appreciate all the work that everyone is doing to bring attention to this and to try to stop them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next, we'll move to Jasmine Banks, the mother of a transgender daughter in Arkansas. Jasmine, the floor is yours.
Hey, y'all. My name is Jasmine Banks. My pronouns are she, her. I am here in Arkansas, where I live with my wife and 4 children, also known as the land of the Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw people. I am the mother of 4 incredible Black children, 3 of whom are cisgender and 1 is transgender. And I want to underscore the reality that Black girls, both cis and trans, are disproportionately criminalized, surveilled, and policed. And so the implications of what has unfolded in Arkansas, a cadre of few folks who are leveraging and weaponizing their, the copycat bills that are being produced outside of this state, what they're doing is doubling down on the impacts of structural inequities that already exist for our people. We know that Black and brown folks already have a hard time accessing medical care. We know that Black and brown folks have work realities where there is not economic justice. We know that the dignity for our families and our right to exist free of state-sanctioned violence is not a reality for so many of us. And so the fact of the matter is my Black trans daughter here in Arkansas will absolutely be a part of that fallout of these General Assembly legislators who do not know her, clearly do not know science, and are unwilling to actually act in the interests of the people of Arkansas. What I know to be true about the South is we believe in Southern hospitality. We believe in family values. We believe in taking care of our neighbors. And that's why these external actors have had to proliferate these bills across the South, because they didn't come from our communities. my wife and I, my wife who's also a trans non-binary person, we created Reconcile Arkansas, which is a collective care nonprofit project to care for the parents and caregivers of trans youth here in Northwest Arkansas and the broader Arkansas community, because we know that the state doesn't keep us safe. We keep each other safe. And so again, I just want to name, particularly in this moment where we're looking at the loss of Black girls, like Makia Bryant, who died at the hands of police, more state-sanctioned violence. In this moment where we are talking about upheaval and insurrection and ideological warfare, we need to understand that our communities are strong, they love one another, and this political game that we've all been a part of the state to separate us from ourselves and make us fight for our human rights and compete against one another, it can't stand any longer, and it won't. And that's why we're organizing and we're building our collective power, and we're reminding the legislators that y'all work for us, not these private interests or corporations.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much, Jasmine. And next we will move to Libby Gonzalez, a transgender young person in Texas. Libby, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Libby Gonzalez, and I live in Dallas, Texas. The first time I asked lawmakers to stop attacking me, I was 6, and now I'm 11. I've had to miss school, which I love going to ask them to just let me be a normal kid. Somebody no one my age should have to do. Lawmakers have to stop attacking trans kids. We're just normal kids that want normal lives, but they won't stop trying to keep us from the things that every other kid has. They've tried to stop me from using the bathroom, which was crazy. Now they're trying to stop me from getting the health care I need. Who am I supposed to be if these bills pass? I told my mom and dad that if this law passes, I want to disappear. I don't know how I'm going to go to school and pretend that everything's okay. I know they don't understand, but it's okay. They don't have to understand what it's like to be transgender. But they are the most powerful people in our state. We are counting on them. If they don't want to understand us, they should at least not keep our families from supporting us. And our doctors from helping us. Why are they so against our existence? No kid should have to worry about this stuff or have to go to Austin to ask their lawmakers to let them have the health care they need. They keep telling kids like me that we don't matter, but I know that I matter. Please stop trying to convince me that I don't. Kids like me who live across the country matter too. These lawmakers have to stop attacking them too for no reason. Trans kids deserve everything that every other kid has. And that includes the health care we need. These bills are trying to prevent us from living our lives as who we really are. And that's just wrong.
Thank you so much, Libby, for that really powerful and moving story. Finally, we will move to Catherine Oakley, Human Rights Campaign State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel. Kate.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, and very, very heartfelt thank you to all of the panelists who've come before. And I thank you to all of you also for joining us. You know, we are, as Alfonzo said, we are reaching an alarming tipping point in this year's state legislative session with a record number of anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced, with more than 250 in 44 states. A record number of anti-transgender bills introduced this year, more than 120, which is almost double our previous record. And we're on the verge of surpassing our previous record of anti-LGBTQ bills that have passed into law. We're on the verge because we've had 8 bills that have been signed already this year. We have 10 that are currently in front of governors, and we have a handful more that are getting ready to move forward. As the others have said so far, you know, these bills that we're seeing, they're attacks particularly on transgender youth. They are attacks on science. They are attacks on medicine, as well as they are attacks on trans kids. And kids like Libby do matter. Libby, absolutely yes. And other kids like you also matter and deserve everything that other kids also have. And the people who are pushing these pieces of legislation, they have no idea what they're up against. They have no idea what they're up against because they don't know how powerful this community is. And I think it's important to say that and reiterate what Alfonso said, which is that the tide may be turning. We've had 2 vetoes of anti-LGBTQ legislation in the last day. I don't anticipate that we'll have enough vetoes of the legislation currently in front of governors that we won't cross this threshold. I am certain that we are going to cross this record threshold in the next couple days. And this is going to be a historically bad year for the LGBTQ community. That is going to happen. But it's also important to say that we are going to keep fighting. And I think that's something that you heard from every single one of us so far, is that this is not over. We are going to keep fighting. We know we're on the right side of history and that our opposition's on the wrong side of history. And we are going to keep fighting. And part of why we have to keep fighting is because these bills are truly, they're sort of an interesting mix of being novel and then also new spins on old things. And then some of them are just the greatest hits, right? So Amy mentioned that in Tennessee, there is a bathroom bill that has now been sent to the governor. That's sort of a greatest hit. Tennessee also has a new spin on an old thing, which is this business bathroom bill, which, as Alfonso mentioned, would require a business to post a sign if they're going to have a formal or informal policy of letting trans people use the restroom consistent with their gender identity. They have to post a very offensive sign outside. And so some of this is new spins on old things. Others of these bills are really new. Last year and this year, we've seen this onslaught of particularly anti-transgender legislation that's going after trans youth in terms of sports and in terms of prohibiting access to medical care. So we have 35 of these bills that have been introduced across the country this year that would prohibit trans youth from being able to access gender affirming care. In both in both Texas and Alabama, we have versions of those bills that would make it a felony for people to provide that care. In Texas, it would make it child abuse to allow a child to go through gender affirming care or to receive gender affirming care. Texas has more than 24 anti-LGBTQ bills currently filed, including that bill I just mentioned, also anti-transgender sports bill, and really the whole gamut. But Texas, it has the most anti-LGBTQ bills filed of any state across the country this year. Tennessee is not far behind, also one of our leaders in terms of the most anti-LGBTQ legislation that has been filed this year. It has already passed a sports ban into law, as Amy said. There's a anti-LGBTQ curriculum bill in front of the governor right now, as well as the student bathroom bill. And there are 2 more bills that are finishing up in the legislature and likely to have their second vote or have their vote in their second chamber next week. That's the business bathroom bill and also a medical care ban. And both of those are likely to move on to the governor. In Arkansas, we have had 4 bad bills pass already this year, 2 religious refusals, a sports ban, and the medical care ban. And as Jasmine alluded to, these bills are incredibly harmful, right? I mean, these are absolutely causing harm this minute. And Arkansas is the only state so far this year to have passed the medical care ban into law. I will note that it was vetoed and the veto was overridden. And that's, as these other bills were all signed into law, it's not as if the governor is a huge friend to the LGBTQ community. This one was so extreme that it was even too extreme for him. And finally, I want to elevate what's also happening in Montana, where we have several bills which may end up being passed. Montana's competing with Tennessee and Arkansas right now to have the most bills signed into law. And in Montana, there's a RFRA, a religious refusal law, that is in front of the governor. And then there's an anti-transgender sports ban a bad sex ed bill, and a bill that would make it harder for people to update their birth certificates, and those are all in the final stages of the legislative process before they get to the governor. And they also have had a couple different medical bans that have been considered over the course of the session. So all told, we have 35 anti-transgender medical bans, 66 trans sports bans, 43 religious refusal bills, and we even have about 16 bills that are relating to bathrooms and locker rooms. So we are going back to some of those greatest hits. You know, I want to just sum up here by saying that our opposition, they are truly getting desperate. We have beaten them back in their attacks on marriage. We have beaten them back in their attacks on the transgender community with the bathroom bills. We have beaten them back as they've tried to have religious refusals and the ability to disregard LGBTQ people or other people with whom they have a religious disagreement, and have a pass from having to deal with folks with whom they disagree in all kinds of walks of life. We have been able to push back on all of those things, and public opinion is absolutely on our side. And we are on the right side of history. We are on the right side in terms of public opinion. This has been a really hard year. And I do want to emphasize that it has been a really, really hard year. It has been historically bad in terms of bills introduced, historically bad in terms of the bills that will pass into law. And as you heard from my co-panelists here today, it has a human cost. These bills are not just numbers. I gave you a lot of numbers. They're not just numbers. It is about the people on the other side of these. People like Amy's child and Jasmine's child and Libby and many other children like them who are on the other sides of these bills and are being targeted by grown-ups with a lot of money who are willing to use them as political pawns. And that is unacceptable. We will continue to fight for those kids and alongside those kids. And as you can see, those kids are willing to fight themselves and they've got lots of people who care about them and are going to fight back. We're going to be continuing to do that. And I do think that the tide is starting to turn, but this is a tremendously painful year for the LGBTQ community and in particular for trans youth. So I will sum up with that and send it back to Wyatt.
Thank you so much, Kate. And with that, we will use this opportunity to open the floor up to questions. The way that we've usually been doing this is if you'd like to message me and let me know that you have a question, I'll make sure to call on you, at which point you can unmute yourself and ask the question either to a specific member of our panel or to the panel more broadly for someone to take. I'll give folks a second to hop into the chat, and in the meantime, it looks like we have a question from Orion from Axios. So I will give Orion a chance to ask that question. Orion.
Thank you so much, Wyatt, and thank you all for doing this call, especially the families joining. I direct this question to Alfonzo.